silk purse.
Hey, what's the matter?
Goddamn FBI don't respect nothing.
Godfather, right?
Two congressmen in another district.
See that scary guy over there? If he's your brother, why is...
I'm grateful that you have invited me to your daughter. I'm going to leave you now because I know you will. What is that outside? I told you it was going to come.
Been 2 years, he's probably in trouble again.
I have a...
Please, Maya, tell me. What was that?
Look on the office.
What can I do?
What is that?
Virgil Salazzo called. Now we're gonna have to get...
Grace thought the nightmare ended the moment the mansion burned. Flames swallowed the Ladomas empire. Bodies turned to ash. And for one impossible second, standing barefoot on that blood-soaked driveway with smoke rising behind her, she actually smiled. Then her phone rang. 3 years later, she still hears that ringtone in her sleep. The diner is quiet except for the hiss of frying oil and rain tapping the windows. Grace wipes coffee from the counter, pretending her hands aren't shaking. New town, new name, new life. That's the lie she repeats every morning. Customers call her Emily now. Nobody here knows she once married into a family that exploded during a satanic ritual game of hide-and-seek. Nobody except the man sitting in booth 6. He hasn't touched his coffee. Black coat dripping rainwater onto the floor. Pale fingers tapping once against the mug. Slow, rhythmic, watching her. Grace feels it instantly, that pressure in her chest. Same feeling she had the night she pulled the trigger on her husband. Run. But her legs don't move. The man finally stands, calm, smiling slightly. "Mrs. Ladomas," he says softly. The plate slips from her hand and shatters across the diner floor. Silence. Every customer turns. The stranger reaches into his coat. And for one horrifying second, Grace sees her husband again. Alex, bloody lips, whispering apologies while holding a gun under his chin. Her stomach twists so hard she nearly collapses. But the man only pulls out an old photograph. A family portrait. The Ladomas family stands around their massive dining table exactly as she remembers them. Except one face has been burned away with something sharp, scratched completely black. Grace stares at it. "Who are you?" The stranger tilts his head. Someone who survived. Outside, thunder shakes the windows, and suddenly the lights go out. The diner plunges into darkness. Customers murmur nervously. Someone laughs. Phones glow across the room like floating ghosts. Grace's breath catches because she smells something beneath the grease and burnt coffee now. Sulfur. The same rotten smell from the mansion basement? No, that's impossible. Then a voice whispered beside her ear. "You should stay dead." Grace spins violently, knocking over a chair, but nobody's there. The lights snap back on. Customers stare at her like she's insane. Booth 6 is empty. The stranger is gone. Only the photograph remains on the table. And on the back, written in jagged black ink, 4 words. "Is still hungry." That night she packs everything in under 10 minutes. Cash, fake passport, revolver hidden beneath the sink. She's done this before. Different cities, different names, always moving. Because deep down, Grace never believed she escaped cleanly. Evil like that doesn't die quietly. Rain pours as she drives through the empty highway. Windshield wipers screech back and forth. Her knuckles stay white around the steering wheel. Then her radio turns on by itself. Static. A crackling voice pushes through. "Grace!" She freezes. Alex's voice. Tears sting her eyes instantly. "No, Grace, listen to me." The car swerves hard across the wet road. Horns explode behind her. She barely corrects in time. "You're not real," she whispers. Static crackles louder. Then another voice joins him. Older, colder. "Mr. Ladomas." "You opened the door," the voice growls. Now he comes for everyone. The radio dies. And the engine shuts off with it. The car rolls helplessly toward a forest road before slamming into mud near the trees. Rain pounds the roof violently. Grace breathes hard, fumbling for the gun in her bag. That's when she sees the lanterns. Tiny orange lights glowing deep between the trees. Moving. At first, she thinks they're people. Then one steps closer. A child, maybe 8 years old. Barefoot in the mud, wearing old-fashioned white clothes soaked dark with rainwater. The boy stares at her silently, pale skin, hollow eyes, and around his neck hangs the same wooden game box from the Ladomas mansion. Grace's blood turns cold. The child slowly raises one finger and points deeper into the forest. More lanterns appear behind him. Dozens. Shapes moving between the trees. Families, men, women, children, all dressed like they stepped out of another century. Their faces pale and expressionless beneath the rain, watching her, waiting. Then Grace notices something even worse. Every single one of them has burned fingertips, like they clawed their way out of fire. Her pulse hammers. "What the hell are you people?" The little boy smiles. Not like a child, like something ancient pretending to be one. "He wants his bride back," he whispers. Then all the lanterns go out at once. Darkness swallows the forest completely. And somewhere beyond the trees, something enormous begins breathing. Grace runs. Mud explodes beneath her boots as she tears through the forest, branches slashing her face while those impossible breathing sounds echo behind the trees. Heavy. Wet. Like some giant animal dragging lungs full of blood. She doesn't look back. Last time she looked back, her entire life burned alive. The lanterns flicker again. Closer now. Orange light flashes between the trunks, surrounding her from every direction. The silent families keep pace without running, just walking, calm, patient, like they already know where she'll end up. Her chest burns. Rainwater blinds her. Then suddenly, a hand grabs her arm. Grace screams and swings the revolver upward, finger tightening on the trigger, but the figure slams her against a tree first. Hard. Pain shoots through her spine. "Don't shoot!" A woman's voice. Young. Breathless. Grace blinks rain from her eyes and sees a dark-haired woman crouched beside her in soaked tactical gear, crossbow strapped across her back, fresh scar cutting down one cheek. Not one of them. The woman glances toward the moving lanterns. "They found you faster than I thought." Grace yanks free instantly. "Who the hell are you?" "No time." The woman grabs her wrist again. "Move." Something crashes deep in the woods. Trees shake violently. Grace follows without thinking. Survival takes over. They sprint downhill through slippery rocks and dead leaves until an old cabin appears hidden beneath the storm. The woman shoves the door open, drags Grace inside, then slams thick iron locks into place. Darkness. Only candlelight glows inside the tiny room. Grace raises the gun immediately. "Start talking." The woman slowly lifts both hands. "My name's Clara. I worked for the Ladomas family." Grace's stomach drops. "No." She backs away. "They're dead. Most of them." Clara's eyes harden. "You really think a curse that old dies in one night?" Outside, something moves around the cabin walls. Slow footsteps crunching wet leaves. Grace keeps the gun aimed at Clara. "I watched them explode, because the deal was broken." Clara steps closer carefully. But the thing they made the deal with? That stayed. Thunder shakes the cabin. Grace remembers the basement, the hidden room. Mr. LaBelle's chair sitting in darkness while the family whispered prayers with trembling hands. She thought it was madness back then. Rich psychopaths playing cult games. Now she isn't so sure. Clara opens an old wooden box sitting on the table. Inside are dozens of photographs. Missing people. Newspaper clippings. Burned documents stamped with the Ladomas crest. Grace flips through them slowly. Families murdered across decades. Brides disappearing after weddings. Children found burned alive without fire damage nearby. One photo makes her freeze completely. Alex, recent, maybe weeks old, standing outside a train station wearing a black coat, alive. "No." Her voice cracks instantly. "That's impossible." Clara watches her carefully. "I saw him myself." Grace's knees nearly give out. Images crash through her mind all at once. Alex begging her to leave. Alex screaming while his body split apart. Alex dying with tears in his eyes because he loved her more than his family. Or maybe he didn't die at all. "He's hunting for you now," Clara whispers. Outside the cabin, the footsteps stop. Silence. Then comes a knock, 3 slow taps against the door. Everyone freezes. Another knock. Grace feels cold spread through her stomach because she already knows who it is before the voice speaks. Grace, Alex? Soft. Gentle. Exactly the same. Her eyes fill instantly. Clara grabs her shoulder hard. Don't open it. But that's not your husband anymore. The voice comes again. Closer now. You left me alone. Grace's breathing turns ragged. She remembers his final expression. The guilt. The terror. The way he whispered, "I want a divorce," moments before his body exploded. Part of her still loved him after all of it. God help her, maybe she still does. Another knock. This time the entire cabin shakes. Dust falls from the ceiling. Grace? Alex says quietly. I can hear your heartbeat. The candles suddenly blow out. Darkness swallows the room whole. Then scratching starts beneath the floorboards. Not one set. Hundreds. Tiny fingernails scraping wood. Clara curses under her breath and lights a flare. Red light floods the cabin in violent color. The floorboards are moving, bulging upward. Something underneath is trying to crawl inside. Grace stumbles backward as a child's hand bursts through the wood. Burned skin, black fingernails. Then another hand tears through beside it, and another. The sound hits next. Children laughing, dozens of them. High-pitched, wet, wrong. The floor erupts. Burned children drag themselves upward from beneath the cabin, mouths stretched into impossible smiles while soot pours from their eyes. Grace fires instinctively. One child's head snaps sideways, but he keeps crawling toward her anyway. Clara loads the crossbow fast. The forest won't let dead things stay dead. A massive crash explodes against the front door. Wood splinters inward, and standing there beneath the storm, illuminated by lightning, is Alex Ladomas. Except his skin is cracked black like cooled ash, and when he smiles, orange fire glows inside his mouth. Alex steps inside slowly. Rainwater drips from his burned coat onto the wooden floor. The flare light twists across his cracked skin, exposing glowing veins underneath like molten lava trapped beneath stone. But his eyes are still Alex's. Soft brown, full of pain. That's what makes it worse. Grace can't breathe. The revolver trembles violently in her hand. You died? Alex smiles faintly. I tried to. Behind him, the storm screams through the open doorway. Burned children continue clawing from beneath the floorboards, giggling while black soot spills from their mouths. Clara fires another bolt straight through one child's skull. It pins the creature to the wall for half a second before the thing starts laughing again. They're stalling us, Clara snaps. We need to go now. But Grace doesn't move, because Alex is staring only at her. You should let me burn, he whispers. The words hit harder than the storm outside. Grace remembers their wedding night, his nervous smile, the way his hand shook holding hers. Somewhere beneath all the blood and madness, he really did love her, maybe enough to damn himself for eternity. A horrible cracking sound interrupts everything. Alex's jaw twitches unnaturally. His expression changes, like something else is pushing beneath his skin, trying to wear him. Leave, he suddenly growls. Not his voice anymore, deeper, ancient. The candles relight by themselves. Every flame bends toward Alex at once. Clara curses under her breath and pulls Grace backward just as Alex slams forward violently. The table explodes apart. Wood shatters across the room. Grace fires twice. Bullets tear through Alex's chest. He doesn't even slow down. Clara throws a hunting knife directly into his shoulder and drags Grace toward the back door. He's fighting it, she says breathlessly. But not for long. Another crash shakes the cabin. The walls. Something enormous circles outside. Grace hears trees snapping one after another beyond the storm. Slow footsteps, heavy enough to shake the ground beneath them. The breathing returns, closer. Alex suddenly freezes mid-step. His face twists in agony. Smoke curls from his mouth while his fingers claw at his own throat. Run, he gasps weakly. Before he sees you, then the cabin roof disappears. Not breaks, disappears. 1 second wood covers them. The next second, massive claws rip straight through it, peeling the entire roof away into the storm like paper. Rain crashes inside instantly. Grace looks up and finally sees the thing breathing in the forest. It's too large to understand at first. A shape towering above the trees, covered in darkness thicker than shadow itself. Long antlers stretch into the sky while burning orange eyes open between them. The creature doesn't fully emerge from the storm, almost like reality can't contain all of it. But Grace recognizes the silhouette anyway. Mr. LaBelle, or whatever inspired the legend. Children stop laughing immediately. Every burned figure kneels around the cabin ruins. Even Clara goes pale. Alex drops to one knee too, shaking violently while fire spills from the cracks in his skin. The creature's voice rolls through the forest without moving its mouth. "Bring me the bride." Grace runs again. Clara follows close behind as they burst through the trees, branches whipping their faces raw. Behind them, the forest comes alive. Burned families walk calmly between the shadows carrying lanterns while Alex's screams echo somewhere far behind them. Grace's chest aches so badly she thinks she might collapse. "Why me?" she shouts. "The family's dead." Clara grabs her arm and yanks her behind a fallen tree as something massive crashes nearby. "Because you survived the ritual." Her breathing shakes. No bride ever escaped before. The curse stayed unfinished. Lightning flashes overhead. For one terrifying second, Grace sees dozens of pale faces watching silently from the woods around them. Waiting, Clara continues quickly. Lee Bale fed on the family for generations. Wealth, power, sacrifices. But when you live through the game, the contract broke incomplete. She swallows hard. Now he wants the marriage finished. Grace feels sick instantly. No, he can't fully enter our world unless the bride accepts him willingly. Another pattern clicks into place inside Grace's head. The voices, the haunting, Alex returning. He wants me to choose him. Clara nods grimly. A scream suddenly tears through the forest. Alex, not angry this time, agonized. Grace turns instinctively toward the sound despite Clara grabbing her shoulder. Through the rain, she sees him staggering between the trees alone, clutching his head while flames burst beneath his skin. And behind him, the giant shadow moves closer. Alex lifts his eyes toward Grace one final time, terrified. Then his body jerks upward violently like invisible hooks pierced his spine. He screams her name as darkness drags him screaming into the storm. Silence crashes over the forest afterward. Even the rain seems quieter. Then Clara notices something ahead and whispers one terrified word. "Mansion." Grace looks up. And there it is. The Ladomas mansion stands untouched at the top of the hill. No burn marks, no ruins. Every window glowing warm gold against the storm like the fire never happened at all. And slowly the front door creaks open by itself, waiting for her to come home. Grace stops breathing. The mansion stands exactly the way it did on her wedding night. Marble stairs glowing beneath rainwater. Golden chandeliers flickering behind tall windows. Soft piano music drifting through the storm like some elegant nightmare waiting to swallow her whole. But she watched this place burn. She remembers flesh melting, explosions shaking the walls, smoke choking the sky while the Ladomas bloodline died screaming around her. So why does the front door stand open now? Clara grabs her arm tightly. "Don't go inside." Grace almost laughs at that. "You think we have a choice?" Behind them, lanterns begin appearing again through the forest, one by one. Silent figures emerging between the trees, carrying orange flames that never flicker in the rain. The mansion wants her cornered. Clara curses softly and pulls a silver knife from her belt. Strange symbols are carved into the blade. "If he offers you anything," she whispers, "don't accept it. Anything? Wealth, love, resurrection." Clara's voice shakes slightly. Lee Bale feeds on desperation. A child's laughter echoes behind them, closer now. Grace turns toward the mansion again. Every instinct screams at her to run, but deeper down another feeling rises. Something colder. Recognition. Like the house remembers her. The massive front doors slowly open wider by themselves. Warm light spills across the rain-soaked steps. And somewhere inside, she hears Alex playing piano. Her heart nearly breaks. Before Clara can stop her, Grace starts walking uphill. The moment she crosses the doorway, the storm vanishes. Silence, perfect silence. The mansion smells untouched. Old wood, expensive wine, candle wax, not even smoke remains. Every painting hangs perfectly in place. Every chandelier glows softly overhead. It feels less like entering a building and more like stepping backward through time. Then she notices the family portraits. They've changed. Every Ladomas face now stares directly at her, eyes following her movements. Clara mutters something under her breath and keeps close behind, crossbow raised. This place isn't real anymore. A piano note echoes through the hallway, then another. Grace follows the sound automatically into the grand dining room and freezes. The wedding table is set again. Fresh flowers, silver candles, crystal glasses filled with red wine, plates arranged perfectly for dinner. At the center sits Alex wearing the same tuxedo from their wedding night, alive, Whole, no burns, no cracked skin. Just Alex smiling softly beneath candlelight. "Hey," he says gently. Grace feels tears hit her cheeks instantly. "Stop doing this." His smile fades slightly. "I'm not doing anything." Clara immediately raises the crossbow. "That thing is wearing your husband's face." Alex's expression darkens. "You shouldn't have brought her here. She saved my life." Grace snaps. For now, the room temperature drops sharply. Frost creeps across the wine glasses. Alex slowly stands from the table, eyes locked onto Clara with growing hatred. "She's hiding things from you," he says quietly. Clara steps back once. Tiny movement. But Grace notices. "What things?" Nobody answers. Then Alex looks at Grace again, and suddenly he seems exhausted, like a drowning man too tired to fight anymore. "You want the truth?" he asks softly. "She worked for my father long before you met her." Grace turns instantly toward Clara. Clara's jaw tightens. "I was trying to stop them, but you still helped build the ritual." Alex steps closer. "You chose brides." Grace feels the room tilt slightly beneath her feet. "No?" Clara finally lowers her eyes. "I didn't know what LaBelle truly was back then." "How many?" Alex asks coldly. Silence answers him, and somehow that silence says everything. Grace stares at Clara differently now. The scars, the fear, the guilt hidden beneath every word. Not survivor's guilt. Accomplice guilt. "I was trapped," Clara whispers desperately. "You don't understand what that family could do. They murdered people," Grace explodes. "And now they're all dead because of me." Clara screams back. The chandelier above them suddenly begins swinging violently. The mansion groans. Something moves inside the walls. Alex looks upward slowly. He's waking up. A deep horn-like sound rolls through the house. Ancient, vibrating through bone instead of air. The candles extinguish one by one across the dining room. Darkness spreads. Then every portrait in the room bursts into flames simultaneously. Grace gasps as burning eyes emerge inside the paintings. The dead La Domas family members begin screaming from inside their own portraits, clawing desperately against the canvas like trapped souls. Daniel, Charity, Emily, Tony, even Aunt Helene, all burning alive forever. "Grace!" Helene shrieks through melting skin. "Don't let him choose you." The walls split open. Black roots burst through the floorboards, twisting like veins beneath the mansion. The entire house shakes violently, while something enormous begins climbing upward beneath it. And then a new voice speaks. Not from the walls, not from the shadows, from directly behind Grace. "You already belong to me." She turns slowly. A tall man stands at the end of the hallway wearing an old black suit, thin smile, dark eyes glowing faint orange beneath the candle smoke. Mr. LaBelle has finally arrived. Mr. LaBelle doesn't move. He simply stands there smiling while the mansion groans around him like a living thing struggling to breathe. Shadows crawl across the walls behind him, not natural shadows. They move too slowly, too deliberately, stretching toward Grace's feet, and somehow that calm smile terrifies her more than the monster in the forest. "You're smaller than I imagined," LaBelle says softly. His voice feels wrong. Too many layers speaking at once beneath the words, like dozens of mouths whispering underneath his own. Grace forces herself backward. "You're dead." LaBelle chuckles lightly. "Dead things built this house." Behind her, Clara suddenly fires the crossbow. The bolt slices straight through LaBelle's chest. Nothing happens. The weapon clatters harmlessly onto the floor behind him, while the wound closes instantly, like liquid darkness stitching itself together. Clara's face drains white. LaBelle tilts his head toward her. Still disappointing after all these years. The black roots beneath the floor explode upward. Clara screams as thorn-covered vines wrap around her legs and drag her violently across the room. She claws at the floorboards. Silver knife scraping wood, but the roots pull her toward the burning portraits on the walls. "Grace!" she cries. "Don't listen to him!" A root pierces through Clara's shoulder. Blood splashes across the dinner table. Grace lunges forward instinctively, but Alex grabs her wrist hard. "No!" The moment he touches her, flashes slam through her mind. Brides screaming inside hidden ritual rooms. Children dragged into forests. La Domas family members kneeling before LaBelle across centuries while offering human lives in exchange for wealth, and Clara standing among them. Younger. Terrified. But participating anyway. Grace rips her hand free like she touched fire. "You helped them." Clara sobs openly now. "I tried to stop it later, But not before hundreds died, LaBelle says pleasantly. The roots lift Clara slowly into the air. The burning portraits scream louder around them. Smoke fills the dining room while the mansion itself begins shifting unnaturally. Hallways stretching longer, ceilings growing taller. Reality bending around LaBelle's presence like heat warping glass. Alex steps between Grace and the creature. Let her go. LaBelle's smile widens slightly. You still love her. Shut up. You died for her. LaBelle walks closer slowly. And now look what your love accomplished. The walls split wider. Below the mansion, Grace glimpses something impossible beneath the cracks. An endless pit glowing orange deep underground, thousands of hands clawing upward through fire. Hell, or something close enough. Alex's expression hardens. I won't let you touch her. For the first time, LaBelle's smile fades. Boy, he says quietly, you belong to me. Alex suddenly collapses. Fire erupts through the cracks in his skin again. He screams in agony while invisible pressure bends his body backward. Grace rushes toward him, grabbing his face despite the heat burning her palms. Alex. His eyes meet hers for one brief second, and there he is again, the real Alex. Terrified, broken, human. I can fight him when you're near me, he gasps painfully. But not much longer. LaBelle watches almost curiously. Love, such a fragile infection. Clara suddenly screams again. Grace turns just in time to see the roots dragging Clara toward the giant fireplace. Flames roar unnaturally high inside it now, shapes twisting within the fire itself like trapped bodies trying to escape. Grace! Clara cries desperately. The ritual room beneath the mansion, destroy the altar. LaBelle moves instantly, faster than thought. 1 second he stands across the room. The next his hand crushes around Clara's throat. Her scream cuts off violently. The temperature drops to freezing. LaBelle stares directly into her eyes. You were warned never to speak of it. Then he twists. A sickening crack echoes through the room. Grace screams. Clara's body falls limp into the flames. But before the fire consumes her completely, Clara throws something across the floor with her final strength, the silver knife. It slides to Grace's feet. LaBelle slowly turns toward her now. No smile left anymore. Only hunger. Enough games? He whispers. The mansion shakes violently as every door slams shut at once. Upstairs, footsteps begin moving through the halls. Hundreds of them. Burned families descending together. Alex struggles to stand beside Grace. The altar's beneath the house, he says weakly. If you destroy it, maybe this ends. Maybe? Grace snaps. Alex gives a broken laugh. My family never really believed in happy endings. The first burned child appears in the doorway holding a lantern. Then another. Then dozens more. Their hollow eyes lock onto Grace simultaneously. LaBelle extends one pale hand toward her. Come willingly, he says softly, and I will give him back to you. Grace looks at Alex, alive beside her, breathing suffering. The offer slices straight through her heart because for one terrible second, she wants to say yes. And LaBelle knows it. Grace can't answer, because Alex is looking at her the same way he did on their wedding night. Hope mixed with terror. Like he already knows she might choose him over the entire world. The burned children begin stepping into the dining room one by one, tiny bare feet leaving black ash across the floorboards. Lantern light flickers across their melted skin while they whisper in soft overlapping voices. Choose him, choose love, choose forever. Grace's chest tightens painfully. LaBelle watches her like a patient fisherman waiting for the line to pull tight. You survived because I allowed it, he says softly. You fascinated me. Alex grabs Grace's arm weakly. Don't listen. LaBelle continues calmly. Every bride begged for life, wealth, escape. But you? His smile slowly returns. You fought. The walls pulse around them, like a heartbeat. Somewhere beneath the mansion, something enormous shifts in the darkness below the floorboards. The pit under the house glows brighter now, orange fire leaking through cracks like blood through skin. Grace picks up Clara's silver knife. Immediately, the whispers stop. LaBelle's eyes narrow slightly. Interesting. Alex notices it too. That blade, it was forged from the original gamebox key, LaBelle says coldly. A pathetic little rebellion. Grace grips the knife tighter. The metal burns freezing cold in her hand. Strange symbols along the blade begin glowing faint red beneath the ash-covered room. The burned children suddenly hiss. Not laugh. Hiss. Then all their heads snap toward the ceiling at once. Heavy footsteps echo upstairs. Slow, deliberate. Grace feels dread crawl up her spine because these footsteps are different, heavier, familiar. A woman's voice drifts softly down the staircase. "Oh, Grace, no." The figure descending from the darkness wears a white wedding dress stained black at the hem, blonde hair hanging wet around pale skin. Charity Ladomas, Daniel's wife. Except half her face is missing now, exposing burned teeth beneath melted flesh. One eye dangles uselessly against her cheek while she smiles anyway. Behind her comes Daniel himself holding a shotgun, his chest still blown open from the night he died. Then Tony, Emily, Helene. The entire Ladomas family walks down the staircase together, burned and broken but very much alive. Grace backs away instinctively. Helene reloads her rifle with skeletal fingers. "Told you," she rasps, smoke leaking from her mouth. The family doesn't leave the table. Alex steps protectively in front of Grace despite barely standing. "You're dead." Daniel laughs weakly. "Yeah, feels terrible." Lee Bale spreads his arms slightly as the family surrounds the room. The contract endures beyond flesh, beyond time, beyond death itself. Grace finally understands. This isn't haunting. This is ownership. Every soul tied to the Ladomas bloodline belongs to him forever. Charity suddenly lunges forward with impossible speed, shrieking wildly. Grace ducks just in time as burned fingers slash past her throat. Alex tackles Charity sideways into the wall while Daniel raises the shotgun. Boom! The blast tears through Alex's shoulder. Grace screams his name as he crashes across the dining table in splintering wood. Everything erupts at once. The burned children swarm forward, laughing hysterically. Helene fires wildly through the smoke. Grace stabs one child directly through the chest with the silver knife, and the creature instantly bursts into black fire. The room goes silent for half a second. Even LaBelle looks surprised. The child doesn't regenerate. It's gone. Grace stares at the knife, then at LaBelle. Fear flickers across his face for the very first time. That's all she needs. She grabs Alex and pulls him toward the hallway while the dead family charges after them. Gunfire explodes through the mansion. Walls split apart as black roots tear through the ceiling. The entire house is collapsing inward around LaBelle's rage. "Basement!" Alex shouts weakly. Grace drags him through twisting corridors that keep changing shape around them. Hallways stretch impossibly long. Doors appear where none existed before. Portraits scream as they pass. The mansion is trying to trap them. Then Grace hears footsteps beside her, not chasing. Matching pace, she turns. Clara runs beside them, covered in burns. Grace nearly drops the knife. "You're dead!" Clara's face twitches unnaturally. "Not yet. Something's wrong." Her movements jerk strangely, eyes unfocused, like a puppet learning how to walk. Alex notices immediately. "Grace? Wait! Too late!" Clara suddenly slams Grace against the wall hard enough to crack plaster. The knife flies from her hand. Clara pins her throat with terrifying strength despite half her body being charred black. "You could have ended this," Clara whispers. But the voice isn't hers anymore. LaBelle speaking through her corpse. "You chose selfishness instead." The walls begin sealing shut around them, brick by brick, closing them inside the corridor forever. Alex, bleeding heavily, crawls desperately toward the fallen knife while Clara tightens her grip around Grace's throat. Grace's vision darkens. The last thing she sees before blackness creeps in is Alex reaching for the blade while fire erupts from beneath his skin again. And this time, he's smiling. Alex drives the knife through Clara's chest. Black fire explodes outward instantly. The corridor shakes violently as Clara's body convulses against the wall, LaBelle's voice screaming through her mouth in dozens of overlapping tones. Grace collapses to the floor, choking for air while the silver blade burns brighter inside Clara's chest like molten metal. Then Clara smiles. Not LaBelle. Her. For one brief second, the real woman returns beneath the horror. "Finish it," she whispers, and she tears herself backward deeper onto the blade. The fire consumes her completely. A shockwave blasts through the mansion. Walls crack open. Portraits burst apart across the hallway while inhuman screams echo beneath the house itself. Somewhere below them, LaBelle roars for the first time. Not calm anymore. Angry. Alex pulls Grace up fast despite blood pouring from his shoulder. The altar's breaking. We don't have much time. The mansion begins dying around them. Floorboards rot beneath their feet. Chandeliers crash from ceilings. The elegant illusion melts away piece by piece, revealing something older underneath. Stone walls blackened by centuries of blood, bones hidden inside the architecture itself. This house was never a mansion. It was a temple. Grace and Alex stumble down twisting stairs while the entire structure groans like a wounded animal. Burned family members claw after them through collapsing hallways. Helene fires one last rifle shot from above, but the ceiling caves in and buries her beneath falling debris. Daniel catches Grace's arm near the basement entrance. His burned face twitches with pain instead of hatred now. "End it," he rasps. "Please." Then black roots erupt through his chest from behind and drag him screaming into darkness. The basement door slams open by itself. Heat pours out. Grace freezes at the top step. The ritual chamber beneath the mansion stretches impossibly deep now, larger than reality should allow. Massive stone pillars disappear into darkness overhead, while rivers of glowing fire run beneath the floor like veins. At the center stands the altar, the old game box, still waiting. But surrounding it are thousands of human figures kneeling silently in circles extending into the shadows forever. Brides, grooms, children. Entire generations trapped beneath the mansion with burned eyes glowing orange in the dark. Every soul the family ever sacrificed. LaBelle rises slowly behind the altar, no longer pretending to be human. His body towers near the ceiling now, antlers stretching through smoke, while darkness pours endlessly from beneath his skin. Orange fire burns inside his chest where a heart should be. "You cannot kill what people willingly feed," he growls. The kneeling souls begin whispering together. A prayer. Grace steps forward anyway. Alex grabs her wrist suddenly. "Wait!" She turns. He's getting worse. Cracks spreading across his skin faster now, fire leaking from his eyes. LaBelle is pulling him apart from the inside. "I'm not leaving you," Grace whispers. Alex smiles sadly. "You already tried that once." The whispering grows louder. LaBelle extends one massive hand toward Alex. "Come home." Alex's body jerks violently toward the creature against his will. He screams in agony while clawing at the stone floor, trying to resist. Grace sees it instantly, the connection. LaBelle owns the family bloodline, even in death. Unless her eyes drop toward the knife, toward Alex, and suddenly she understands why he's smiling. "No," she whispers immediately. Alex's eyes fill with tears. "Grace, no." The chamber shakes harder, souls screaming now, the mansion collapsing above them. Alex forces himself closer, despite the invisible force dragging him backward. "If I stay alive," he gasps. "He always has a doorway." Grace shakes her head violently. "We'll find another way." There isn't one. LaBelle smiles again because he knows it too. Alex presses his forehead against hers. For one fragile second, the horror disappears. She sees only the man who nervously proposed to her in candlelight, the man who tried to save her even while damned. "I really did love you," he whispers. Grace breaks. Tears stream down her face as she grips the silver knife with trembling hands. Alex guides the blade gently toward his chest. Then suddenly, gunfire explodes across the chamber. Everyone freezes. A burned figure staggers from the shadows holding Daniel's shotgun. Daniel himself, barely standing, half his body missing. He pumps another shell directly into LaBelle's chest. The creature roars furiously. "Now!" Daniel screams. Grace drives the knife into the altar. The game box splits apart instantly. Every soul in the chamber begins screaming at once. LaBelle lunges forward too late as fire erupts upward through the floor. The mansion shakes apart violently. Stone pillars collapse. Souls ignite like paper in a furnace. Alex grabs Grace one last time and smiles. Then the fire takes him. White light swallows everything. Morning sunlight touches Grace's face. She wakes lying in wet grass outside the ruins of the mansion. Smoke rises from blackened stone behind her. Birds chirp softly through the trees like nothing ever happened. The curse is gone. The silence proves it. Grace slowly sits up, tears drying on her cheeks, until she notices something resting beside her in the ash. Alex's wedding ring. Still warm. And far off in the forest, for just 1 second, she hears him laugh. Matt Bettinelli Olpin and Tyler Gillett built the first Ready or Not on a wickedly simple idea. What if family tradition became ritualized murder? That mix of horror, satire, and blood-soaked comedy turned a mid-budget thriller into a cult favorite almost overnight. Now, 7 years later, Ready or Not 2. Here I Come arrives, carrying something far heavier than expectation. Sequels to surprise hits always walk a dangerous line. Go bigger and you lose the intimacy people loved. Stay too safe, and audiences accuse you of repetition. Horror history is filled with franchises crushed under that pressure. But here's the fascinating part. This creative team actually understands why the first movie worked beyond the gore and punchlines. The directing duo, collectively known as Radio Silence, never approached horror like traditional studio filmmakers. Their movies move with punk rock energy, fast cuts, sudden tonal pivots, characters who talk like actual people instead of exposition machines. You can see that DNA in Scream and its sequel, where they revived a dying franchise by understanding that self-awareness only works when the emotional stakes stay real. That's the balancing act they mastered. Audiences laugh, then immediately tense up because danger still feels genuine. No easy feat, and that matters enormously for this sequel because the original film ended so definitively. Grace surviving the Ladomas family massacre wasn't structured like typical franchise bait. It felt complete, final, cathartic. Samara Weaving walking away, covered in blood while smoking a cigarette, became one of modern horror's defining closing images precisely because it didn't beg for continuation. The story was over. Or at least it seemed over. So why return now? Because horror franchises evolve with cultural anxiety. The first film targeted inherited wealth and elite family systems, hiding corruption beneath old traditions. Since 2019, public distrust toward institutions, dynastic power, and performative privilege has only intensified. Suddenly, the themes inside Ready or Not feel less like sharp satire and more like prophecy wrapped in dark comedy. That's fertile ground for expansion if the writers understand the assignment, and early signs suggest they do. Writers Guy Busick and R. Christopher Murphy reportedly return with a story leaning harder into mythological fallout rather than simply repeating hide-and-seek carnage. Smart move. Horror sequels often collapse because they confuse iconography with storytelling. They think audiences just want more kills. But memorable horror franchises survive through escalation of mythology. A Nightmare on Elm Street deepened dream logic. Evil Dead 2 turned terror into absurdist chaos. The best sequels widen the universe instead of photocopying the first movie. Samara Weaving returning changes everything too. Not just because she's charismatic, though she absolutely is, but because Grace became more than a final girl. She represented class rage disguised as survival instinct. Watch her performance closely in the original film. Every scream feels half terror, half exhaustion from dealing with rich people insanity. That's why audiences connected with her. She wasn't polished. She wasn't invincible. She looked perpetually one bad decision away from collapse. Human, messy, funny, furious. Modern horror desperately needs protagonists like that. The industry spent years chasing elevated horror aesthetics while sometimes forgetting audience connection. Beautiful dread only gets you so far. What Radio Silence understands is momentum. Their films move. Characters panic, improvise, fail, bleed, recover. Chaos drives tension. That kinetic energy separated Ready or Not from slower prestige horror dominating the late 2010s. It felt dangerous in a different way, less existential despair, more survival nightmare spiraling out of control in real time. Now imagine that style with a larger canvas. The subtitle, Here I Come, hints at inversion. The hunted becoming the hunter. That's speculation, sure. But horror titles rarely happen accidentally. If Grace spent the first movie escaping a cursed bloodline, this sequel could explore what surviving that trauma actually does to someone psychologically. Horror rarely lingers on aftermath long enough. Trauma becomes sequel fuel instead of character evolution. But there's dramatic gold in asking whether Grace escaped evil or inherited part of it. And honestly, that's scarier, because the original film already flirted with the idea that violence changes people permanently. Grace survives, yes, but survival comes at grotesque emotional cost. By dawn, she's transformed into someone harder, colder, almost mythic. Sequels work best when they recognize transformation instead of resetting characters back to default settings. Ignore emotional consequence, and the audience stops investing. Visually, expect escalation without abandoning tactile brutality. Radio Silence favors practical messiness over overproduced CGI slaughter. Blood sprays feel physical. Impacts hurt. Their camera movement throws viewers into panic instead of observing safely from a distance. That aesthetic matters because horror comedy dies when violence feels weightless. The humor in Ready or Not worked because every injury looked agonizingly real beneath the absurdity. Pain first, punchline second. That's the formula. The bigger challenge may actually be tonal. Horror comedy is one of cinema's hardest balancing acts because rhythm determines everything. Joke too hard, tension evaporates. Lean too dark, comedy feels forced. The first film threaded that needle almost perfectly by grounding ridiculous situations in sincere character reactions. Nobody winked at the audience. Characters believed the insanity even while viewers laughed at its absurdity. That sincerity preserved immersion. Lose that sincerity and the whole machine collapses. Which brings us to the real reason people are excited for this sequel. Trust. Rare commodity these days. Audiences trust Samara Weaving. They trust radio silence. They trust this franchise's ability to be nasty, funny, stylish, and strangely cathartic all at once. That combination doesn't happen often in modern studio horror. Most productions pick one lane. This series swerves between them with reckless confidence. And reckless confidence? That's usually where cult classics are born. A sequel like this lives or dies on one question. Does the script expand the nightmare, or does it just reload the same gun? Guy Busick and R. Christopher Murphy return as writers, and that continuity matters because Ready or Not 2, Here I Come does not begin from a blank page. It begins from consequence. Grace has survived one ritual, one family, one mansion, one impossible night. The smartest writing choice is that the sequel reportedly picks up moments after the original, refusing to let survival become a neat ending. Grace does not get peace. She gets promoted to the next level of hell. That next level idea is the screenplay's central engine. The first film was intimate. One bride, one family, one cursed tradition. The sequel widens the circle into rival elite families, a council, and a throne-like high seat controlling the world. On paper, that sounds dangerously ridiculous. But ridiculousness has always been part of this franchise's bloodstream. The trick is commitment. The script cannot wink too hard. It has to treat billionaire demon politics with the same straight-faced panic that made exploding rich people funny and horrifying in the first movie. What Busick and Murphy understand is escalation through mythology. Bad sequels escalate through noise. More weapons, more bodies, more chaos. Better sequels escalate through meaning. Here, the Ladomas family no longer feels like an isolated freak incident. They become one branch of a larger rotten system. That reframes the original without cheapening it. Grace did not accidentally marry into one cursed household. She stumbled into the machinery behind generational power. And here's the catch: expanding mythology can kill horror. Mystery shrinks when explained too neatly. The more rules you reveal, the less primal the fear becomes. So the screenplay has to walk a tightrope. Give us enough structure to make the sequel feel bigger, but keep enough madness alive that the world still feels unstable. The premise of four rival families hunting Grace and her estranged sister Faith gives the story immediate shape, but it also risks turning occult horror into a tournament movie. That can work, if character stays louder than lore. Faith is the key addition. Catherine Newton's character is not just sequel decoration. She gives Grace something more vulnerable than self-preservation. In the first movie, Grace wanted to survive. Simple, pure, brutal. Here, survival becomes relational. She has to protect someone who carries personal history, resentment, guilt, maybe abandonment. Suddenly, the chase is not just physical. It is emotional baggage sprinting through carnage. That is smart writing because horror becomes richer when characters are forced to save relationships while saving their own skin. The sister dynamic also gives Grace somewhere to go. Without Faith, the sequel could easily trap her in repetition. Grace screams, Grace runs, Grace fights, Grace bleeds. Fun, sure, but thin. With Faith, the writers can dig into who Grace was before the wedding night massacre. Family is no longer just the enemy's theme. It becomes Grace's unfinished wound. That mirror is important. The first film attacked aristocratic family loyalty as grotesque obligation. The sequel can ask whether broken family bonds can survive when the world itself becomes predatory. Structurally, beginning immediately after the first movie creates delicious pressure. No recovery arc. No time jump. No years later reset. Grace enters the sequel exhausted, traumatized, physically destroyed, and probably wanted by police. That gives the script momentum from frame one. It also preserves one of the original's best qualities, the feeling that events are spiraling faster than anyone can process. Horror comedy thrives on that breathless rhythm. Characters make terrible decisions because they have no time for good ones. The dialogue challenge is harder. The first film's humor came from class absurdity colliding with real panic. Rich people discussed murder like awkward family etiquette. Grace reacted like a normal human trapped inside insane wealth theater. The sequel's broader conspiracy could tempt the script toward over-explanation, but the best version keeps dialogue sharp, panicked, and character-driven. Let villains reveal themselves through entitlement, not speeches. Let Grace cut through mythology with exhausted profanity. That contrast is the franchise's comedic engine. The title, Here I Come, is doing more work than it first appears. It echoes hide and seek, obviously, but it also flips Grace's role. In the original, she was hunted. Now the phrase suggests pursuit, arrival, confrontation. She is no longer merely hiding from power. She is being dragged toward its center. That is a clever sequel title because it promises both continuity and reversal. Same childhood game language, different power dynamic. The screenplay's biggest opportunity is moral corruption. If Grace can claim the high seat, what does that mean? Does survival require entering the same system that tried to sacrifice her? That question has teeth. The first movie let viewers cheer aristocratic destruction without complication. This sequel can twist the knife. Destroying evil is satisfying, but inheriting power is dangerous. Grace may not want the throne, but horror loves forcing characters to touch the thing they hate. That is where the writing can become more than franchise extension. Beneath the gore, beneath the jokes, beneath the rich family blood sport, this story has a brutal little idea at its center. Sometimes surviving a corrupt system does not free you from it. Sometimes survival makes the system notice you. And once the script builds that trap, the actors have to sell every scream, every joke, every betrayal, every impossible emotional pivot. Because on the page, mythology gives the sequel scale. On screen, performance gives it a pulse. Casting this sequel is not just about finding recognizable faces, it is about building a social food chain. The first Ready or Not had one poisoned family tree. Ready or Not 2. Here I Come needs an entire ecosystem of power, and the casting tells you exactly what kind of movie this wants to be. Bigger, stranger, and more dangerous, but still anchored by one blood-soaked woman who looks like she has had absolutely enough. Samara Weaving returning as Grace is the whole foundation. Without her, this sequel becomes mythology without a heartbeat. Grace worked in the first film because Weaving played panic with texture, not clean movie panic, ugly panic, screaming panic, laughing because death is too absurd panic. That performance turned her into one of modern horror's most memorable final girls, and the sequel wisely refuses to replace that energy. Grace is not being passed off to a new generation. She is being dragged deeper into the nightmare she already survived. Then comes Katherine Newton as Faith, Grace's estranged younger sister, and that is the casting move that changes the emotional math. Newton has built a career playing characters who can weaponize charm without losing vulnerability. There is always a flicker of chaos behind the eyes. Put her beside Weaving, and the film instantly gains a different rhythm. Grace is raw survival instinct. Faith can bring younger, sharper, more reactive energy. Together, they create something the first movie did not have, a sister dynamic under extreme pressure. That means arguments during violence. Old wounds opening mid-chase. Love expressed through terrible timing. The official premise places Faith beside Grace immediately after the first film's events, with both sisters hunted by rival elite families, while Grace is pushed toward claiming the high seat of a world-controlling council. That setup makes Newton more than comic relief or sequel bait. She becomes the personal stake inside a larger conspiracy. If Grace only has to survive again, the story risks repetition. If Grace has to protect someone she once failed, suddenly every chase scene carries guilt. Sarah Michelle Gellar joining as Ursula Danforth is inspired genre casting. Horror audiences do not see Gellar as just another actor. They bring Buffy with them. They bring I Know What You Did Last Summer. They bring decades of genre memory. So when she appears inside a universe about ritualized violence and elite predators, the casting creates instant tension. Is the movie using her heroic legacy against us? Is Ursula charming, cruel, aristocratic, theatrical? Whatever the angle, Geller's presence gives the sequel a sharp meta-charge without needing to announce it. Elijah Wood as the lawyer, a representative of LaBelle, might be the most deliciously weird choice. Wood carries innocence in his screen image, even when he plays disturbing characters. That contradiction is valuable. A demonic legal functionary should not necessarily look monstrous. He should look polite, soft-spoken, almost helpful. That is much scarier. Evil-wearing manners has always been this franchise's specialty, and Wood can make bureaucracy feel sinister with just a smile held half a second too long. Reports list him alongside Weaving, Newton, Geller, Sean Hatosy, David Cronenberg, and Nestor Carbonell in the ensemble. David Cronenberg as Mr. Danforth is another casting choice loaded with cinema history. Cronenberg is not just an actor here. He is a walking association with body horror, cold intellect, and institutional cruelty. His presence tells viewers, subconsciously, that this world is older and uglier than Grace understands. He does not need to shout. He does not need to chase anyone with an axe. Put Cronenberg at the head of a powerful family, and the room already feels contaminated. Sean Hatosy and Nestor Carbonell add another layer, actors with faces built for moral ambiguity. Hatosy can project menace without cartoon villainy, while Carbonell has that controlled elegance that makes authority feel both polished and threatening. That matters because ready or not villains cannot all be screaming maniacs. The best ones believe their own etiquette. They dress murder in tradition. They make brutality feel like policy. The casting team, credited on Letterboxd as John Bushan and Jason Knight, appears to have built the ensemble around tonal contrast rather than simple star power. That is exactly what this movie needs. Weaving and Newton bring frantic human volatility. Geller brings genre iconography. Wood brings unsettling softness. Cronenberg brings icy mythology. Hatosy, Carbonell, and the broader council family cast give the world texture. Different flavors of rich person evil. Different masks. Same rot underneath. And that is the genius of this casting approach. Every new face suggests a different version of power. Family power, legal power, old money power, ceremonial power, corporate power. The sequel is not just asking Grace to survive another night, it is surrounding her with institutions wearing human bodies. But the most important chemistry remains between Weaving and Newton. If that sister relationship works, the sequel has emotional weight. If it fails, the mythology risks becoming expensive wallpaper. Horror audiences will accept absurd rules, exploding bodies, demon contracts, and secret councils controlling the world. What they will not accept is empty emotion. They need to feel why Grace keeps fighting after she has already earned the right to collapse. That is why casting matters so much here. The screenplay builds the game. The directors control the chaos. But the actors decide whether the blood means anything. Samara Weaving does not return to this franchise as a clean, heroic icon. That would be the boring version. Grace, by the time Ready or Not 2, Here I Come begins, is not strong in the polished studio sense. She is wrecked, bloodied, sleep-deprived. Fresh off surviving the Ladomas family's attempted ritual sacrifice, she is thrown almost immediately into another deadly game, this time with her estranged sister Faith beside her and rival elite families hunting her for control of the high seat. That is a brutal acting challenge because Weaving has to carry continuity in her body. Grace cannot simply reset between films. Her shoulders should still remember the weight of that wedding dress. Her voice should still sound scraped raw from screaming. Her eyes should carry the particular horror of someone who has seen rich people explode because a demon contract demanded payment. Absurd? Completely. But Weaving's gift has always been making absurdity feel physically expensive. In the first film, she played fear like a full-body malfunction. Here, the performance needs a sharper edge. Grace has survived too much to be merely terrified, but not enough to be emotionally healed. That middle ground is where Weaving thrives, panic hardening into rage, rage cracking into exhaustion, exhaustion suddenly snapping back into survival instinct. She can make a punchline land without softening the danger around it. That is rare. Most actors lean either comedy or horror. Weaving lets both happen inside the same breath. Catherine Newton's Faith changes the rhythm completely. The sequel's official setup puts Faith at Grace's side as the nightmare escalates beyond one family into a larger council-controlled game. That means Newton is not just playing the sister. She is playing the person who forces Grace to become human again. Alone, Grace can be pure survival. With Faith, survival becomes emotional. Every choice now has consequence beyond herself. Newton is especially well suited for that friction. She often plays characters with bright surface energy and buried volatility, which makes Faith feel like someone who can challenge Grace instead of merely needing rescue. That matters. A weaker sequel would turn Faith into baggage. The better version makes her a wound with legs. Someone Grace loves, resents, failed, needs, and cannot fully protect. Their relationship gives the movie its pulse underneath the screaming. The most interesting performance tension is guilt. Grace left something behind before the events of the first movie, and Faith's presence drags that history into the open. Weaving can play Grace's defensiveness as armor. Newton can chip at it with sarcasm, hurt, and fear. Put them together in a chase scene, handcuffed emotionally, if not literally, and the action becomes more than movement. It becomes an argument with weapons nearby. That is where lead performances elevate horror comedy. The audience can laugh at the insane mythology, the high seat, the rival families, the demonic legal structure. But they need to believe the sisters. Their fear has to feel immediate. Their anger has to feel old. Their love has to feel inconvenient. Because sibling love is often not soft. It is history. It is resentment. It is knowing exactly where to stab with words because you grew up memorizing the weak spots. Weaving's Grace also carries one of the sequel's smartest thematic burdens. What happens when the final girl is not allowed to be final? Horror loves survival, but it often avoids aftermath. Grace won. Grace escaped. Grace should be done. Instead, the system expands and pulls her back in. Weaving has to perform the emotional insult of that. Not just terror, but disbelief. The universe has the nerve to ask more from her after she already gave everything. Newton's Faith, meanwhile, gives the film a second kind of fear. Grace fears repetition. Faith fears discovery. She is entering a nightmare she did not earn, tied to a sister whose trauma sounds impossible until bodies start dropping. That lets Newton play confusion turning into belief, then belief turning into fury. And if the movie is smart, Faith will not become brave all at once. Courage is more interesting when it arrives ugly, through panic, bad choices, and desperate loyalty. Together, Weaving and Newton have to sell tonal whiplash without making it feel like whiplash. 1 second, they are dodging elite family murder rituals. The next, they are fighting about abandonment. Then a joke lands. Then someone dies horribly. That kind of rhythm is actor-dependent. Editing can sharpen it. Direction can shape it. But only performers can make the emotional turns feel alive instead of mechanical. And Weaving remains the franchise's secret weapon because she understands Grace is funny precisely because she is not trying to be. Grace's reactions are reasonable inside unreasonable circumstances. That is the joke. She is surrounded by people treating murder like etiquette, inheritance, and boardroom politics, while she keeps responding like a normal person trapped in satanic aristocrat nonsense. The more seriously Weaving plays Grace's exhaustion, the funnier the world becomes around her. By contrast, Newton can bring unpredictability. Faith does not know the rules, so she becomes the audience's renewed shock system. Through her, the sequel can rediscover the insanity of its own premise. Grace is already familiar with demonic rich people games. Faith is not. That difference lets the film balance veteran survival with fresh disbelief, and that balance may be the key to making the sequel feel alive instead of recycled. If the performances work, Ready or Not 2 becomes more than bigger mythology. It becomes a sister story disguised as a blood sport comedy. Grace and Faith are not just running from monsters, they are running through everything unresolved between them. And in horror, that is where the best screams come from. Not the blade, not the trap, not the demon in the shadows, but the person beside you who knows exactly who you were before the nightmare began. The supporting cast in Ready or Not 2? Here I Come has one major job: make the world feel bigger without making Grace feel smaller. That is harder than it sounds. The first film worked because the Ladomas family was grotesquely specific. One mansion, one cursed bloodline, one hideous tradition dressed up as etiquette. The sequel widens that into rival elite families and a demonic power structure, so every supporting character has to feel like a doorway into a different corner of that rotten universe. The confirmed ensemble includes Sarah Michelle Gellar, Sean Hatosy, David Cronenberg, Elijah Wood, Nestor Carbonell, Kevin Durand, Olivia Cheng, and others around Samara Weaving and Catherine Newton. Sarah Michelle Gellar as Ursula Danforth is the kind of casting that does half the work before she says a word. Horror fans carry history with her. Buffy, I Know What You Did Last Summer. The Scream Queen who became the fighter. So placing her inside this world of elite ritual violence creates immediate tension. Is Ursula someone Grace should fear? Someone audiences secretly want to trust? Both possibilities are useful. Gellar's screen image lets the film play with expectation, and that is exactly the kind of meta-texture radio silence loves. Sean Hatosy as Titus Danforth gives the Danforth family another flavor of threat. Hatosy has a grounded, lived-in intensity. He does not need theatrical villain gestures to feel dangerous. That matters because rich horror villains are scarier when they are calm. Loud evil is easy to identify. Polite evil gets invited to dinner. The Danforths, especially with Gellar, Hatosy, and David Cronenberg grouped together, feel designed as old-money predators with different masks for the same appetite. And Cronenberg as Chester Danforth? That is delicious. He brings the ghost of body horror into the room. Even when he is simply sitting there, his presence suggests systems, disease, mutation, institutional coldness. The casting does not need to shout, "Important patriarch." It simply lets decades of cinematic association do the work. Chester feels like someone who would not chase Grace through a hallway. He would design the hallway, fund the trap, and watch politely from somewhere comfortable. Elijah Wood as the lawyer, a representative of LaBelle, might be the strangest and sharpest supporting move. Wood has a face audiences instinctively read as gentle, even innocent, which makes him perfect for bureaucratic evil. A demon's lawyer should not look like a monster. He should look helpful, tidy, mildly apologetic. That contrast makes the mythology funnier and creepier at once. People's report on the film's digital release also highlights Wood's presence in the blooper reel, which hints at how much tonal playfulness surrounded his role even behind the scenes. Nestor Carbonell as Ignacio El Caido adds elegance with a blade underneath it. Carbonell has always had the ability to make stillness feel active. His face can hold charm and threat in the same frame. In a sequel built around elite families competing for ultimate power, that quality is invaluable. Ignacio cannot feel like a generic rival family boss. He has to feel like someone with rituals of his own, rules of his own, pride of his own, different dynasty. Same sickness. Kevin Durand, listed as Bill Wilkinson, brings a more physical, blunt force energy to the ensemble. Durand's screen presence often carries size, unpredictability, and a little madness around the edges. That gives the supporting cast range. Not every powerful family should feel aristocratic in the same way. Some should feel ceremonial, some corporate, some brutal, some almost feral. A mythology like this needs class hierarchy, but it also needs texture. Otherwise, the villains blur into one expensive costume party. Olivia Cheng as Wan Chen Xing and the broader family representatives expand the sequel beyond the Ladomas bubble. That is crucial. The first movie's satire targeted inherited wealth through one American Gothic family. The sequel appears to globalize the sickness. Power becomes international. Ritual becomes institutional. Grace is no longer fighting her in-laws. She is fighting a network. That shift only works if the ensemble convinces us these families belong to the same evil ecosystem while still feeling distinct. But ensemble dynamics are not only about villains. The supporting cast has to orbit Grace and Faith in a way that sharpens their relationship. Every aristocrat, lawyer, patriarch, heir, and hunter should pressure the sisters differently. One threatens them physically. Another tempts them politically. Another explains the rules with unbearable smugness. Another reveals just enough family history to reopen old wounds. That is how a crowded sequel avoids becoming noise. Each supporting character must attack a different vulnerability. The best horror ensembles understand rhythm. You need the theatrical character, The quiet menace, the comic irritant, the wild card, the authority figure, the one who dies horribly because the movie needs to remind everyone what game we are playing. Ready or Not 2 seems built for exactly that variety. It is not just a cast list. It is a murder board of personalities, each one representing a different way power protects itself. And that is why the ensemble matters so much. Grace and Faith give the movie its heart, but the supporting cast gives the nightmare its architecture. They are the walls closing in, the rules changing mid-game, the smiling faces behind impossible violence. The sequel's world only works if every corner feels occupied by someone worse than the last. Because in this franchise, family is never just family. It is inheritance. It is debt. It is performance. It is blood on polished floors. And once the people are in place, the next question becomes visual. What kind of world do these monsters live in? Production design is where Ready or Not 2, Here I Come has to prove its sequel logic. The first film gave us one mansion, and that mansion mattered. It was not just a location. It was an organism, wood-paneled, candlelit, aristocratic, full of weapons, portraits, servants' corridors, and inherited rot. The sequel expands the game into a council of elite families fighting for the high seat, with Grace and Faith hunted by rival dynasties after the Ladomas massacre. That means the design challenge becomes bigger. How do you make power feel architectural? The answer appears to be scale with personality. A generic secret society headquarters would kill the tone instantly. This universe cannot look like bland superhero mythology. It needs texture. Old money should feel different from new money. Ritual wealth should feel different from corporate wealth. The Danforth complex, where much of the larger council structure comes into play, has to carry the atmosphere of a place where murder has been rehearsed for generations. Not spooky for decoration. Spooky because privilege has fossilized into ritual. That is what made the first movie's mansion so effective. Every room looked expensive, but never comfortable. The walls felt like they had watched things. Ready or Not 2 has to take that visual idea and multiply it across families. Danforth elegance, Wilkinson brutality, El Kaido ceremony, Juan precision, Rajan formality. Different cultural and class signatures, same moral disease. The production design becomes a map of evil wearing different fabrics. Costume design becomes equally important because this franchise understands clothing as social satire. Grace's destroyed wedding dress was one of the first film's greatest visual jokes. Bridal purity shredded into survival armor. In the sequel, she reportedly begins still connected to the immediate aftermath of the original's ending, which means her body and clothing carry continuity before dialogue even starts. That matters. A clean costume reset would feel dishonest. Grace should look like a person the movie refuses to let recover. Faith's visual identity has to contrast that. Catherine Newton's character enters as the estranged sister, not another ritual survivor. So her costume language can show distance from Grace's nightmare before the nightmare swallows her too. Cleaner lines, less damage at first, maybe more contemporary, less gothic. Then the game begins and the clothes tell the story before the script does. Fabric tears, blood spreads, shoes become useless, elegance collapses into function. Horror loves this kind of transformation. Wardrobe becomes character erosion. The elite families, meanwhile, need costumes that reveal how they see themselves. Not monsters, hearers, judges, competitors. People who dress for murder like it is a gala with rules. That is the disgusting comedy. The more polished they look, the uglier their behavior becomes. Sarah Michelle Gellar, David Cronenberg, Elijah Wood, Sean Hatosy, Nestor Carbonell, Kevin Durand, and others form the broader ensemble, and each face suggests a different visual temperature the design team can build around. Props are another huge storytelling weapon here. The first Ready or Not turned antique weapons into punchlines and threats at the same time. Crossbows, pistols, axes, ritual cards, objects carried family history and incompetence. For the sequel, the high seat mythology needs its own prop language. Rings, contracts, ceremonial tables, game pieces, family emblems, legal documents from LaBelle's representative. These objects should feel absurdly formal because that is the franchise's joke. Evil does paperwork. And Elijah Wood's lawyer role sharpens that idea beautifully. A demonic legal representative means the design around him can lean into bureaucratic horror. Documents, fine print, polished accessories, rules presented with professional calm. People's coverage of the digital release mentions Wood's costume and blooper material, which quietly reinforces how much visual identity matters to that character. The funniest version of evil here is not horns and smoke. It is someone adjusting a sleeve before explaining why you have to die. Color also has to evolve. The first film leaned into warm aristocratic interiors. Amber light, dark wood, red blood, cream fabric ruined by violence. Ready or Not 2 can keep that DNA while widening the palette. Council spaces could feel colder, more institutional, more global. Family rooms can have distinct tones. Grace and Faith's path through the movie should feel like moving through different chambers of power, each one with its own visual logic, each one closing in. The hospital opening, if handled well, offers a perfect contrast. Fluorescent lights. Public space. Medical sterility. Grace should be safe there, but this franchise knows safety is a joke. Bringing elite violence into a hospital turns the ordinary world into another hunting ground, making the conspiracy feel larger than any mansion. Once murder can enter sterile modern spaces, the audience understands the old curse has contemporary reach. What the design cannot do is become too clean. Ready or Not works because it feels tactile. Blood sticks, wood splinters, dresses drag, bodies hit floors with ugly weight. If the sequel's bigger world becomes too polished, it risks losing the sweaty panic that made the original so satisfying. The design should be expensive, yes, but never weightless. Wealth must have surfaces Grace can smash into. That is the production design promise of Ready or Not 2. A larger mythology you can touch. Not just lore explained in dialogue, but power carved into rooms, stitched into clothing, stamped onto rings, hidden in contracts, and spilled across floors. The world gets bigger, but it still has to feel trapped. Because in this franchise, architecture is not background. It is inheritance with walls. And once those walls are built, the camera has to decide how to hunt through them. Cinematography in Ready or Not 2. Here I Come has to do something deceptively difficult. Make chaos readable. A movie like this cannot simply shake the camera, spray blood, and call it energy. The audience needs panic, yes, but panic with geography. Where is Grace? Where is Faith? Where is the nearest exit? Who has the weapon? Who is lying in wait? Horror comedy collapses when action becomes visual soup, because timing depends on clarity. The joke lands only if the danger lands first. Brett Jutkovich returns as cinematographer, carrying over visual DNA from the original while working on a larger sequel canvas. He is credited with the cinematography on Ready or Not 2, with Jay Prachidny editing and Sven Falconer composing the score. That continuity matters. The first Ready or Not had a grimy elegance, warm mansion light, deep shadows, handheld panic, and blood that looked horribly physical against expensive interiors. The sequel cannot abandon that texture just because the mythology expands. The camera's first responsibility is Grace's body. Samara Weaving's performance depends on physical exhaustion, and the cinematography has to stay close enough for us to feel it. Not glamorous close-ups. Survival close-ups. Sweat, bruising, smeared blood, eyes darting before the brain catches up. When horror stays too wide, pain becomes choreography. When it gets too close, space disappears. The sweet spot is controlled claustrophobia, frames tight enough to trap Grace, wide enough to let us fear what might enter. Faith changes the visual grammar. With Catherine Newton beside Weaving, the frame has to hold two survival rhythms at once. Grace understands the madness because she has lived it. Faith is processing it in real time. That contrast should shape shot design. Grace scanning exits while Faith stares at the impossible. Grace moving from instinct while Faith hesitates half a beat too long. Good cinematography catches that without underlining it. Two bodies in the same danger, but not yet speaking the same survival language. The sequel's expanded mythology also demands stronger spatial contrast. The original mansion felt like an inherited trap. Here, the film moves from immediate aftermath into hospitals, elite compounds, council spaces, and hunting grounds tied to multiple powerful families. Reports describe the story as picking up after the first film, with Grace and Faith pulled into another deadly game involving elite families competing for power. That means each location needs a different visual temperature. Sterile hospital whites, ritual room darkness, polished wealth, industrial back corridors, Spaces should not blur. Each one should feel like a new mask worn by the same evil. Lighting is where the satire sharpens. Rich people horror should never look randomly dark. It should look designed. Warm light can feel luxurious and rotten at once. Chandeliers can make violence look ceremonial. Polished wood can turn blood into accusation. The franchise's best visual joke is contrast, something disgusting happening in a room built to impress guests. If the sequel understands that, every murder scene becomes class commentary without needing a speech. Camera movement needs restraint, too. Radio silence loves momentum, but momentum is not the same as chaos. The best movement in this universe feels reactive, the camera chasing Grace down hallways, whipping towards sudden threats, stumbling into rooms alongside characters. Too smooth, and the danger becomes stylish distance. Too shaky, and the comedy loses timing. The ideal is controlled instability. You feel the floor shifting, but you never lose the game board. Action blocking becomes even more important because this sequel reportedly leans into bigger stakes, larger playing field, a higher body count, while still aiming for crowd-pleasing carnage. Bigger is tempting. Bigger is also dangerous. The camera must resist treating scale as spectacle alone. The original worked because every room felt survivable until it suddenly did not. Ready or Not 2 needs that same tactical intimacy even when the mythology grows. Every set piece should answer a simple question. How can Grace and Faith get out of this specific room alive? Visual humor is another weapon. A perfectly framed aristocrat preparing for murder like it is a dinner engagement can be funnier than any line of dialogue. A wide shot of Grace and Faith standing in absurdly formal surroundings while covered in blood can say everything. Horror comedy often thrives in composition, the elegant and the grotesque forced into the same image. That is where this franchise breathes. The technical execution also has to protect the gore. Practical-looking violence needs weight, and weight comes from framing. Let impacts register. Let bodies fall awkwardly. Let blood stain expensive surfaces long enough for the audience to feel both shock and satisfaction. Cut too fast and violence becomes noise. Hold too long and comedy curdles into cruelty. The edit and camera must dance together. Setup, impact, reaction, punchline, pain first, punchline second. What makes Jutkiewicz such a strong fit is that his work across modern genre filmmaking understands atmosphere without sacrificing pace. The sequel's cinematography should not chase prestige horror stillness. This is not a movie about dread slowly blooming in silence. It is a movie about dread kicking the door open, tripping over a corpse, and somehow still looking expensive. That requires images with velocity. The real visual test comes down to perspective. Are we watching an elaborate elite game from above, or are we trapped inside it with grace and faith? The answer has to be both, but never equally. The villains can have symmetry, ceremony, wide frames, and polished control. The sisters need fragments, movement, imperfect framing, breath. That contrast turns cinematography into character psychology. Power sits still. Survival runs. And when the camera gets that right, Ready or Not 2 can make its larger world feel just as dangerous as one locked mansion. Bigger rooms. Wider mythology. More families. Same pulse in your throat. The eyes can trap us in the hunt. But the ears? The ears decide when the blood turns cold. Sound is where Ready or Not 2, Here I Come can be cruel in the most entertaining way. Horror comedy depends on timing, and timing is not only editing, it is breath, footsteps, a door latch clicking half a second too early, a scream cut off by something wet and awful. The first film understood that violence becomes funnier when the sound design refuses to make it soft. Bodies did not fall like movie props. They hit like furniture dropped downstairs. Pain first, punchline second. Sven Falconer takes over the score for the sequel, while Brian Tyler's original themes remain part of the musical DNA, with Tyler also credited as score producer. The official soundtrack was released March 20, 2026, the same day as the theatrical release, and runs 34 tracks on Apple Music. That continuity matters because this sequel cannot sound like an unrelated franchise wearing Ready or Not skin. It needs new mythology, yes, but the old ritual pulse still has to beat underneath. Falconer is a smart fit because he has already worked with Matt Bettinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillett on Scream 6, another film that required music to move between genre reverence, modern panic, and sharp violence. Ready or Not 2 gives him a different playground. Less slasher legacy, more demonic aristocracy. The sound of this world should feel expensive and diseased. Not just scary strings, courtly instruments, ceremonial textures. Music that feels like it has been played in private rooms for generations while terrible things happen downstairs. That Baroque meets slaughter approach is exactly the right flavor for the High Council mythology. The score reportedly uses viola da gamba, cello motifs, and themes tied to the satanic power structure and central characters. That is perfect because old instruments bring old money into the audio landscape. A modern synth can create dread, sure, but a bowed string with antique texture can make the violence feel inherited, like the murder has ancestry. Grace and Faith need a different sound. Their music should not be polished. It should interrupt the ceremony. Grace's theme, if carried forward from Tyler's original material, should feel damaged now, recognizable, but bruised. Faith's presence gives the score room for emotional tension beyond survival. Sisterhood, guilt, resentment, loyalty, those cues cannot become sentimental too quickly. This franchise would reject that. The emotion has to leak through chaos, not pause the chaos for a speech. Silence may be just as important. In a movie full of screams, explosions, and comic gore, silence becomes a weapon. The best scare is often not the loud sound. It is the empty space before it. A hospital hallway with fluorescent hum. A council chamber where everyone stops speaking. Grace breathing too hard while Faith tries not to move. That kind of quiet makes viewers lean forward. Then the movie earns the crash. Sound effects carry the comedy too. The franchise's violence is absurd, but the audio has to make it grossly physical. Tearing fabric, shoes slipping on blood, antique weapons misfiring, flesh impacts that land just a little too hard. If the sound is too cartoonish, horror dies. If it is too realistic, comedy curdles. The mix has to sit in that nasty middle zone where you laugh and wince at the same time. Licensed music can also sharpen the satire. The soundtrack details include a cover of Will You Love Me Tomorrow and a fictional 1980s-style band track connected to Ice Nine Kills' Grave Diggler persona. That kind of needle-drop energy fits radio silence perfectly. Playful, violent, a little ridiculous, but aware of genre pleasure. A sweet old song over elite carnage that is ready or not language. Romance curdled into ritual. The final mix has to balance all of this without exhausting the audience. Horror comedy sound can become loud soup if every kill, joke, scream, and musical sting competes for dominance. The strongest version knows when to pull back. Let Grace mutter something furious under her breath. Let Faith's panic crack through the room. Let Elijah Wood's demonic lawyer speak softly enough that everyone listens. Sometimes the quietest voice in a horror movie is the most dangerous one. That is the audio identity Ready or Not 2 needs. Elegant music over ugly violence, silence before absurdity, screams that turn into laughs and laughs that curdle back into fear. The eye sees the game, the ear feels the trap closing. And after sound shapes the nightmare, the real story moves behind the camera, where production choices, scheduling, and sequel pressure decide how controlled the chaos actually was. The production journey behind Ready or Not 2. Here I Come has one of those sequel origin stories that sounds almost too neat. Radio Silence were already developing an original sister-centered movie for Samara Weaving and Catherine Newton. Then Searchlight asked them about continuing Ready or Not, and that separate idea was folded into Grace's universe. That matters because Faith does not feel like a studio-mandated add-on. She comes from the project's creative seed. The sequel was not born from, we need another one. It was born from, what if this relationship belongs inside that nightmare? Searchlight officially announced the sequel at an October 12, 2024 special screening of the original film, confirming Weaving's return along with Radio Silence, writers Guy Busick and R. Christopher Murphy, and the original producing team. Catherine Newton joined in March 2025, which tells you the sister angle was not decorative. It was central enough to shape the casting and story early. Grace had already earned her place as a modern horror favorite. Bringing in Faith meant the production had to build not just more danger, but more emotional friction. Principal photography began in Toronto on April 24, 2025, the same day major cast additions were announced. Sarah Michelle Gellar, Elijah Wood, Kevin Durand, David Cronenberg, Sean Hatosi, and Nestor Carbonell. Filming wrapped by early June 2025, with Olivia Cheng also revealed as part of the ensemble and the title finalized as Ready or Not 2. Here I Come. That is a tight production window for a sequel juggling horror, action, comedy, blood effects, multiple elite families, and mythology expansion. Tight schedules can break a movie or sharpen it. The Canadian production base makes perfect sense. Toronto and surrounding locations offer exactly the kind of visual flexibility this sequel needs. Polished hotels, institutional corridors, old-world interiors, urban anonymity, and wealthy spaces that can be made to feel ceremonial. Reports have pointed to Ontario and Quebec locations, including Toronto and Montreal, with the Fairmont Royal York Hotel named in location coverage. That hotel detail fits the franchise perfectly. Luxury spaces are never neutral in Ready or Not. They are traps with better lighting. And then there is the costume continuity. Samara Weaving and Catherine Newton announced the wrap with an image of the two handcuffed together, blood-stained, with Grace still visually tied to the destroyed wedding dress aftermath of the first film. That one production image says more than a paragraph of marketing copy. The movie is not politely continuing Grace's story. It is yanking her straight from one disaster into another. No reset, no shower, no therapy, just consequence. Behind the scenes, that creates a practical challenge. Grace's look is iconic, but iconography can become a prison. The costume, blood continuity, physical injuries, and performance state all have to track from the first movie into the sequel without feeling like cosplay. Weaving cannot just wear the dress again. She has to carry the night inside her posture. Production continuity becomes emotional continuity. Every stain matters because every stain is memory. The blooper reel material from the digital release hints at the tonal atmosphere on set, especially around Elijah Wood's lawyer character, with people describing footage of Wood struggling humorously with both costume and lines. That may sound small, but it reveals something important. This production could laugh at itself while still building a nasty horror machine. Horror comedy needs that spirit. Too serious, and the absurdity suffocates. Too loose, and the scares lose teeth. The best sets for this genre usually understand play and precision at the same time. Radio Silence's advantage is familiarity with controlled mayhem. After Ready or Not, Scream, and Scream 6, Bettinelli, Ulpin, and Gillett know how to stage panic without losing character. Their productions tend to thrive on ensemble energy. Actors trapped in rooms, rules changing, bodies dropping, jokes landing under pressure. Ready or Not 2 gives them more moving parts, but the core production language remains similar. Put people in confined spaces. Add rules. Add blood. Let desperation reveal character. The release path also shows studio confidence. The film premiered at South by Southwest on March 13, 2026, then opened theatrically in the United States through Searchlight on March 20, 2026. SXSW is exactly the right launchpad for a movie like this. Genre-friendly, audience-reactive, built for midnight movie energy. Ready or Not is not meant to be watched in polite silence. It wants gasps, laughs, groans, applause after a kill. Festival placement becomes part of the experience. What stands out most about the production is how deliberately it avoids the laziest sequel route. It could have simply rebuilt the mansion. Another family, another game, another night. Instead, the production takes the original's class war horror and scales it outward through locations, ensemble casting, and mythology. That is risky because bigger worlds can dilute intimate fear. But the production seems aware of that danger by keeping Grace physically and emotionally close to the first film's ending. That tension, bigger world, immediate trauma, is the behind-the-scenes heartbeat. The movie expands, but Grace does not get distance. The mythology grows, but the body count still has to feel personal. Every production choice, from filming locations to costume continuity to cast expansion, serves that contradiction. And once production wraps, the next test is brutal. Numbers. Because in Hollywood, blood may sell the trailer, but box office decides whether the game continues. Box office tells a colder story than fandom does. Ready or Not 2. Here I Come did not explode into theaters like a breakout horror event. It opened modestly, earned respectably, and survived because the budget stayed disciplined. That is the real business lesson here. Horror does not always need blockbuster numbers to win. It needs control. The reported production budget was about $14 million, and the film's worldwide gross reached roughly 3 times that figure in some tracking, with the numbers listing a $9.07 million domestic opening and a 3.0 times budget worldwide multiple. That opening weekend matters because expectations were higher than the result. The sequel had Samara Weaving returning, Catherine Newton joining, Sarah Michelle Gellar bringing genre nostalgia, Elijah Wood adding weird prestige, and radio silence carrying post-scream credibility. On paper, this should have been a spring horror comedy event. Instead, it debuted to about $9.1 million domestically, finishing behind louder competition. Box Office Mojo also lists the domestic opening at $9,075,271, and the biggest problem had a name: Project Hail Mary. Ryan Gosling's sci-fi event film dominated the same weekend conversation, launching with massive mainstream attention while Ready or Not 2 played to a narrower cult horror audience. Entertainment Weekly reported Project Hail Mary opening to $80 million domestically, while Ready or Not 2 landed at a modest $9.1 million. That is brutal counter-programming. Horror fans showed up, but casual audiences had a bigger shiny object. Still, calling this a failure would be lazy. The reported $14 million budget changes the entire conversation. A $9 million opening on a $70 million movie is panic. A $9 million opening on a $14 million horror sequel is survivable. Bloody Disgusting framed the opening with that exact context, noting that the low budget gave Searchlight a realistic path toward profit, even if a trilogy became less certain. The legs were decent, not spectacular. The numbers lists a 2.53 domestic multiplier from the biggest weekend, which means the film did not collapse instantly after opening. That tells us something important. The audience that found the movie generally stayed positive enough to keep it alive for a few weeks, but word of mouth did not transform it into a runaway phenomenon. Cult affection is powerful. It is not always mass market fuel. Internationally, the film performed more quietly. Box Office Mojo lists about $22.98 million domestic and $15.97 million international for a worldwide total near $38.96 million, while other tracking cited totals around $42.2 million. That gap is not unusual across reporting sources, but the overall picture stays the same. Modest theatrical run, respectable budget-to-gross ratio, not a franchise explosion. The commercial impact becomes more interesting when digital enters the room. The film hit premium VOD on May 5, 2026, with Blu-ray and DVD scheduled for June 16, according to Decider and People. That fast digital window suggests Searchlight understood the theatrical ceiling. Ready or Not 2 may be exactly the kind of movie that keeps earning after theaters. Rentals, horror fans, double feature rewatches, franchise bundles, late-night streaming discovery. That is where modern horror economics have changed. Theatrical gross is still the headline number, but genre movies build afterlives. The original Ready or Not became beloved partly through home viewing. The sequel may follow the same path. It may not have conquered the box office, but it can still strengthen the brand if digital performance stays strong. Commercially, Ready or Not 2 feels like a controlled win with a warning label. It proved there is still audience appetite for grace, radio silence, and this satanic rich family universe. But it also proved that cult popularity has limits when released against a 4-quadrant event movie. The franchise survived the game. It did not dominate it, and that makes the next question even more important. How did critics and audiences respond once the numbers stopped shouting? Reception to Ready or Not 2. Here I come split in the exact way you would expect from a sequel that refuses to stay small. Fans wanted more grace, more blood, more class war carnage, and more demonic rich people absurdity. Critics generally agreed the film delivered that pleasure, but the disagreement came from scale. The first Ready or Not was elegant because it was simple. One bride, one mansion, one night. The sequel opens the gates, adds councils, rival families, supernatural bureaucracy, and bigger mythology. For some viewers, that is the fun. For others, that is the problem. The early SXSW response leaned enthusiastic, especially from genre critics who understood the movie as a crowd experience. Reports from the festival described exactly the kind of room this franchise needs. Laughs, groans, yelps, cheers, that collective horror comedy electricity where the audience reacts like one giant nervous system. This matters because Ready or Not 2 is not built for silent admiration. It is built for reactions, loud ones. Rotten Tomatoes' own first review roundup captured the positive side of that response, with critics praising the sequel's ability to match or even exceed the original's energy. The common praise was simple. Samara Weaving still owns this world. Even critics who found the sequel overstuffed tended to point back to her as the reason it keeps moving. Grace remains the emotional fuse. Light her, and the whole movie sparks. Metacritic tells the more complicated story. The film sits at a 58 Metascore, labeled mixed or average, based on 34 critic reviews, while its user score is listed as generally favorable at 6.2. That gap feels right. This is not a consensus masterpiece. It is a bloody crowd pleaser, with structural mess. Critics admired the energy, but questioned the clutter. Audiences were more forgiving because the film gives them the thing they came for: weaving, chaos, gore, jokes, and rich people suffering consequences. Brian Tallarico's RogerEbert.com review frames the sequel through a useful comparison, like John Wick. Chapter 2, Ready or Not 2, takes a clean original premise and blows it into a full mythology, complete with rules and explanations. That comparison cuts both ways. Expansion can be thrilling. Expansion can also be exhausting. The sequel's biggest strength and biggest weakness are the same thing. It wants to show us the whole machine behind the mansion. The Associated Press review was more skeptical, arguing that the sequel loses some of the first film's playful absurdity under a heavier tone and longer runtime, while still praising Samara Weaving's magnetism. That criticism lands because Ready or Not depends on rhythm. Too much mythology, and the movie starts explaining when it should be sprinting. Too much seriousness, and the joke goes cold. But Decider's VOD review leaned warmer, calling the film consistently amusing and emphasizing that fans of the first movie should enjoy its campy kills, satire of the ultra-wealthy, and refusal to take itself too seriously. That is the movie's defense in one sentence. It may not be as clean as the original, but it knows its appetite. Blood, class rage, absurd rules. Samara Weaving reacting like the only sane person in a room full of ritualized insanity. Audience response followed that same pattern. CinemaScore reportedly gave the film a B+, matching the first movie's grade, which suggests viewers got roughly what they expected. Not universal adoration, but solid satisfaction. That is important. The sequel may not have become a box office breakout, but it did not alienate its core audience either. For a cult horror comedy sequel arriving 7 years later, that is no small achievement. Culturally, the film's biggest conversation centered on whether Ready or Not needed mythology at all. Some fans loved seeing the Le Domas curse expanded into a larger elite power network. Others missed the brutal simplicity of Grace versus her in-laws. Both reactions make sense. The first movie was a locked-room nightmare. The sequel is a conspiracy carnival. Same bloodline, different beast. And that is the final shape of its reception. Admired, debated, slightly messy, undeniably alive. Ready or Not 2 did not replace the original. It complicated it. It turned a perfect little nightmare into a franchise universe. And whether that feels exciting or excessive depends entirely on how much demon lawyer world building you want with your exploding aristocrats. But beneath the reviews, scores, and fan arguments, the deeper question remains. What is this sequel actually saying about survival, power, and the cost of winning a game designed by monsters? The deepest joke in Ready or Not 2, Here I Come, is that Grace wins the first game and discovers winning does not free her. It promotes her. That is the franchise's nastiest idea. Power does not disappear when one family explodes. It reorganizes. The Le Domas clan were not the disease. They were a symptom. The sequel expands that sickness into elite families, demonic hierarchy, and a high seat that turns survival into political currency. Grace does not escape the system. The system notices her. That is why the sequel's class satire still works, even when the mythology gets messier. The first film mocked old money as ritualized stupidity. People so loyal to inherited privilege that they would murder a bride because tradition told them to. Ready or Not 2 pushes that idea further. Wealth becomes global, bureaucratic, competitive. These people do not just inherit houses and titles. They inherit rules for killing, permissions for domination, and a supernatural legal structure that makes evil feel administratively approved. Grace remains the perfect weapon against that world because she has no elegance. Samara Weaving plays her like a human alarm system, furious, terrified, disgusted, somehow still funny. Catherine Newton's Faith gives that rage an emotional target. Now, Grace is not only fighting power, she is fighting the old damage in her own family. That is the sequel's smartest thematic move. It understands that family can be prison, wound, obligation, and rescue mission all at once. The high seat mythology is both the film's biggest swing and its biggest weakness. It gives the sequel scale, but it also risks explaining too much. The original was cleaner because its rules were simple. Hide until dawn, survive the rich, watch them pay. Here, the lore gets louder. Demon lawyers, elite councils, power rings, rival dynasties. It is fun, but sometimes the machinery creaks. Bigger does not always mean sharper. Still, the movie earns its place by refusing to become polite. It is bloody, ridiculous, mean, and proudly excessive. Critics generally responded positively, while acknowledging that the sequel loses some of the original's stripped-down magic in the process. Metacritic placed it in mixed to average territory, while other reviews praised its crowd-pleasing carnage and Weaving's return. Its legacy will probably not be better than the first. That bar is too clean, too beloved, too perfectly nasty. Ready or Not 2 is more likely to become the wild sequel people argue about. Less precise, more ambitious, sometimes overstuffed, but alive in every frame. It proves Grace can carry a franchise without losing her bite. It proves Radio Silence still understands horror comedy rhythm. And it leaves the door open for a third film that could either refine the mythology or blow the whole empire to hell. Final verdict. Ready or Not 2 is not as elegant as the original, but it is bigger, bloodier, angrier, and funnier than most sequels dare to be. The first movie was a perfect trap. This one is a trapdoor. Messy? Yes. Worth entering? Absolutely.